Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense. My name is Jordan Robertson. I'm a cybersecurity reporter with Bloomberg News here in Washington, D.C. This is our weekly cybersecurity web show broadcasting out over Facebook and Periscope. As viewers of this show will know, we want this to be highly interactive. So anything we're talking about today, please feel free to leave a comment and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. My Twitter handle is at JordanR1000, so you can feel free to send questions there, and if we don't get to them during the show, we can try to get to them next week. Wanted to dive right in here. The topic of conversation this week is the meeting, the big meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping of China happening today at the Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. As most viewers will know, this is a very significant meeting for a lot of reasons, and I wanted to touch on some of the cybersecurity components that could come up, considering some new research that's come out, that might provide some useful tips, for y'all about how to protect yourselves from, nation-state attacks, including a new breed of Chinese nation-state attacks that has just come out. So to catch everybody up. The President Trump and Xi Jinping, are meeting this week. They're going to be discussing a lot of issues, primarily North Korea, but also critically trade issues. This was a key issue that Trump ran on, and is something that he promised his voters, would be a real strong point for the U.S. in negotiations with China. And some key backstory here is that. It wasn't that long ago, just the last several years, all you'd read about when you read about cybersecurity were Chinese-based, hacking attacks. Chinese hackers were hacking everybody, and they were stealing lots of intellectual property. This seemed to be, a coordinated effort, by the Chinese government and the Chinese military to acquire intellectual property for economic advantage. To build industries and to kind of catch up with the West in a lot of areas. It's pretty well documented stuff. But an interesting thing happened a few years ago. The Obama administration really started to clamp down on this kind of hacking and really started to push back on the Chinese government. I mean, understandably, these are very fragile negotiations, and you kind of have to pick your battles. So, but for a time there, cybersecurity was a top concern, especially after the theft of tens of millions of sensitive government files from the Office of Personnel Management. Background checks for federal employees, the most sensitive data about these folks working in law enforcement, intelligence, and other sensitive jobs that you can imagine. So an interesting thing happened then, and I want to show you a chart that kind of highlights what I'm talking about. Prior to about 2013, the attacks from China were just going up and up and up and up and up, and every company was getting hit. After the Obama administration started saber rattling a little bit, you can see in this chart from FireEye what happened. The number of attacks from alleged Chinese government or military groups plummets from 2013 to 2016. And that doesn't mean the attacks still aren't happening, but that just means the frequency and the scale of them was significantly diminished. And we've spent a lot of time talking to administration folks, former Obama administration folks, and they said this was a really big priority for the administration, to reduce Chinese hacking attacks through the threat of sanctions, through criminal prosecution of key PLA, Chinese military members, things like that. This idea of shaming, was a really significant one for the Obama administration. They said this is a key weapon the U.S. can use to diminish cyber attacks from China. And at least from these data points, from FireEye and some others, the volume of attacks really did decrease. So that kind of sets the backdrop for this meeting now. But there's a really interesting twist that I wanted to update you guys on, and that is, while these attacks were decreasing, you can see there still are attacks. I mean, it's not like attacks from China have stopped. They've just gotten more targeted, more efficient, and stealthier. And this week, actually today, a company called Fidelis Cybersecurity, which does incident response, breach investigation, just like FireEye does, they released a report that I think viewers of the show might find pretty compelling. And it's about a new alleged Chinese nation-state attack against U.S. interests, targeting, of all things, a major U.S. trade lobby. And this trade lobby includes companies, all the big companies you can think of that are based in the U.S. So Google and Microsoft and Visa and all the big automakers and the big banks. Everybody you can think of is part of this trade group. And what this trade group does is it lobbies the administration on policies it believes the U.S. should adopt toward countries like China. So the reason this report is interesting, as viewers of this show will know, I like to try to provide some actionable information, practical tips that the kind of the layman, which I consider myself in this area, can do to protect yourself online. And what this new research on this attack shows is that not only is Chinese nation state attacking still occurring. I mean, nobody thought it would go away entirely. Maybe just some of the more obvious attacks would go away. But there are some things you can do as a kind of an average internet user, to at least be aware of what some of those threats are. And what I'll start with is, kind of everybody knows that spear phishing, is the big way that most people get hacked. You get an email, it's designed to look like something that you're expecting or from somebody you're familiar with, like your boss or your friend or something like that. You open it, you get malicious software in your computer, and that's how data is stolen. That's still the way most attacks happen. What this Fidelis report found, though, is that the Chinese government is still very interested in what's called watering hole attacks. Now, the watering hole attack approach means that you compromise a website where lots and lots of interesting people are going to be going and entering personal information or communicating sensitive information, things like that. It's called a watering hole because everybody congregates there. And it's a quick and easy way to attack or surveil a lot of people at once. And in this case, the attack was targeting the website for the National Foreign Trade Council, that U.S. trade lobby that I mentioned. And what was interesting about it is Fidelis found that this attack group, again believed to be from China, basically planted some malicious software on the part of the web page, not just the whole web page. It's not like you'd visit the web page and you get your computer compromised. It was a very specific part of the web page, which is what I think might provide some helpful information to some viewers. It was the part of the web page that involved the registration of board of directors for a very specific board of directors meeting on March 7th. And the significance of that is you don't have to hack an entire website to be really effective. So, if you're going to a website that you think could reasonably be a target of a nation-state hacking attack, you don't necessarily have to expect that the whole thing is compromised. However, things get interesting when you start entering your personal information. And what happened in this case is the attackers compromised that website where you would register your information. But the key was these aren't ordinary people registering for this board of directors meeting. They are, top level, ambassadors, as it were, for these major U.S. tech companies and U.S. companies in general. And what this malicious software did was, it was basically a very high-end piece of surveillance software which would seek to fingerprint you. So, you're trying to log in, you're trying to register for this board of directors meeting, and what this will do is say, okay, this person is entering, whatever information you're entering, name, date of birth or email or, profession or an organization, but also, most critically, it would identify the type of computer you're using, the type of operating system, the type of applications you're running, which version you're running, all of these kinds of things that will prove useful for a future attack. The value of that is, all you really need to do in that scenario, you don't have to enter, I guess the point is you don't have to enter personal sensitive information to make yourself more vulnerable to attack. In this case, all those individuals had to enter was name, organization, probably email. And from there, the attackers had all the information they needed to target them for a future attack. They knew what type of computer they used. They knew what type of operating system they used. They knew what type of applications were on their system. And that could help them craft a really perfect spear phishing email, from that point forward. So the point of that is, when you're going to these sites, just be aware that this could be the first step in a second or third or fourth stage type of attack. And how you register for these sites can impact your security kind of down the road. We've got some questions coming in. Thanks for everybody writing in. As I say, we're wide open to questions, so please feel free to leave anything on this topic or others, in the comments section. First question here is this something that Presidents Trump and Xi are talking about in their meeting? Well, we don't know for sure. This is one of the big mysteries of the Trump administration, is what in specific he's going to do from day to day. So he hasn't said explicitly, what he's going to discuss, but you can all but guarantee that two topics in particular are going to come up. North Korea, which is test firing missiles, which is saber rattling, which is, kind of proving to be a big problem for both countries. It'd be a shock if that's not top of the list. Trade is going to have to be a key issue here. I'd be surprised if it's not number two. And within that, this type of intelligence gathering becomes a really important, weapon for both countries. I mean, the U.S. does this as well. But knowing in advance, what big companies are asking the government for, and knowing what their priorities are, in what are supposed to be private discussions, that's hugely valuable. If that information, I should note that this Fidelis research that I'm mentioning, this attack was short. This was like a few days leading up to this board of directors meeting, and the idea being to compromise these people as they're discussing what they want to tell the president, kind of in advance of these important meetings. And having that information is hugely valuable, either to the U.S. government or the Chinese government, or both. So I would be shocked if trade is not a top priority here, and one side or both may come with a competitive advantage that they may not be aware of on the other side. Next question here is a good one. Are these hacks more of a threat than the Russia hacks? The reason it's an interesting question is they're very different attacks. These two countries, every country attacks in different ways. What we've seen from Russia is the style of attack that they've preferred, and both Russia and China are very high-level attackers. These are A-level groups on both sides, and they just look different, when they actually attack. What the Russian attacks look like and have looked like are these information operations, stealing information, stealing emails, on the election and leaking them, is now the case. Stealing emails and using it to blackmail people. Like, that's kind of a classic Russian model of information and influence operations. The Chinese model is very different. Historically in hacking, it's been about intellectual property theft, stealing, economically valuable data about companies or the markets, for use for domestic companies. China is trying to catch up to the West in many ways economically, and that data has provided an enormous advantage, according to security researchers and administration folks. So, it's hard to quantify, is this more of a threat than Russia hacks than not. They're just very different. I mean, one thing you shouldn't expect is that if indeed this was the Chinese government hacking this U.S. trade lobby, you should expect that information will never be made public. Like, I would be shocked if that information then at some point appears on a website like WikiLeaks, as some sort of information operation. It could, but that's just not the way the Chinese have operated in this realm. Next question here, can you explain more specifically how this attack was carried out? Sure. Again, this is, website watering hole attacks, as they're called, are not that hard to set up. You just need to find a website that's very interesting. I'll put it to you this way. If you're going to try to hack the Google website, you're going to try to hack, Gmail, if you're going to try to hack, any of the other Google services, Google spends a lot of money on its security. It's going to be really hard to find a part of Google's web, web infrastructure where you can just do like what happened here. However, this U.S. trade lobby, which I mentioned here, the National Foreign Trade Council, they had a part of their website, the registration part of the website, that was vulnerable. So this allegedly Chinese group, put a small piece of malicious software on the registration part of the website. So whenever anybody went to that part of the website, the malware kicked in and started watching and started cataloging who these people are, what type of technology are they using, what type of computer are they using, what type of browser are they using. It's basically preparing a dossier on every single person that went to that site. Now, the brilliance of that attack is, if you just attack the front page of that organization's website, you're going to get all manner of people visiting that page. And most of them probably not particularly interesting from a nation state perspective. If you limit the attack, however, to just the registration part of the website, and just the registration part of the website for registering for the board of directors meetings, a very kind of narrow part of the website, basically anybody you get there is going to be interesting from a nation state perspective. And so what they did was they cataloged who these people were and what technologies were they using and fingerprinted them essentially. And you get everything. You get IP address, email address, name, organization, all those kinds of things. And the idea here is that that information would be exceptionally valuable for targeting a future attack, such as a spear phishing attack or even a zero-day attack, if this was a person of enough significance that they wanted to attack them using some higher-end tools. So the takeaway for the average user is there's not much you can do about this. If the website you're interfacing with is not secure, these kinds of things will happen. It is, however, important to remember that any of these little breadcrumbs that you leave behind when you register for conferences or you register for these kinds of meetings, if you're in a position to where that this would be something you'd be doing, these are all breadcrumbs that can eventually come back to bite you. There's not much you can do about that, but you can be aware. And you do things like maybe use different browsers as your, and I know people who do this, who they will use a different web browser, and in some cases a different computer when they're accessing the public internet, such as registering for these meetings and these conferences, and then an entirely different system or setup, for when they're accessing work email or for when they're accessing a private system. These are kind of extreme measures, but this is the reason why people do that, because you do leave these breadcrumbs for intelligence services to then go find you, and that's just really not where you want to be. Next question here is, how successful was Obama at getting China to stop hacking? Have we seen a rise of attacks since he left office? Well, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll go back to this slide, which I find pretty useful, you talk to former Obama administration folks, and they will very sincerely point to stats like this and say, the method of approaching China on this issue of hacking was effective. And my conclusion at this point is that they have reason, I think they're correct in some ways, that by applying this kind of pressure to China, especially this kind of social pressure, this idea that the U.S. is going to sanction China over these actions, and we're going to keep indicting people, members of the military, the Chinese military, for doing these activities. There was a cost there. There was a potential cost in the eyes of the Chinese government, and you can see. The data shows a lot of those attacks stopped. Now, again, nobody is going to say, oh, attacks from China just went away, any more than they would say, there'd be any amount of political pressure that could cause the U.S. to stop hacking. But what it does show is that some amount of pressure is effective, at least in this case. And for all of the hundreds or thousands of U.S. companies that were hacked by China, and that continue to be hacked by China, this kind of decrease is really significant. It minimizes to some degree, a measurable degree, the amount of your, what they call attack surface. And that's significant. Nobody expects attacks to go away. But I think the Obama administration, my assessment is, the Obama administration can rightfully claim that their efforts in regard to China help diminish some of these hacking attacks. The flip side of the coin, however, is, the big elephant in the room is that, as we saw during the election, attacks from Russia have gone up. Russia very much viewed the U.S. sanctioning of Russia for the invasion of Ukraine as an affront to Russia's sovereignty, and the attacks, the hacking attacks from Russia just spiked since then. So it's kind of like a teeter-totter. One side goes down, the other side goes up. It's kind of a zero-sum game in that regard. One of the things I wanted to mention here as we move forward here is that the point of the show again is that I want to provide some actionable information, actionable tips. You might, after seeing this information, say, well, there's nothing I can do. It is true, you can't stop a website that you're using from getting hacked. That's just outside the realm of power of a normal person. What you can do, however, is simply be aware that governments, especially foreign governments, don't know everything about you automatically. They need clues about how to attack people they're interested in, especially whether you're a journalist or human rights activist or, more to the point, a business leader. Anybody who's in a position to have sensitive information, whether it's economic or political or whatever, any of these little clues that you leave behind on the internet that link to your identity and create a record of who you are, those things are valuable. It's not like the Chinese government can just pull out the phone book and figure out who you are and attack you kind of very easily. It does take work to figure out who's important in these worlds. So if you do occupy one of those positions, it's really helpful to remember that these types of breadcrumbs, they do matter. Even if you're not entering your social security number, even if you're not entering your date of birth, you're not entering what you would consider sensitive information, it's all kind of sensitive when it comes to hacking. And that's probably the key takeaway. So with that, I want to thank everybody who wrote in with questions. There were some really good ones. Again, please feel free to write me offline on Twitter at JordanR1000, JORDAN, the letter R 1000. And also, please feel free to check out some of our other shows. We've got a great podcast called Decrypted that you can check out, and a number of other things as well. So please feel free to visit Bloomberg.com/tech and check out any of those. With that, we'll see you all next week, and thanks for tuning in to Digital Defense.